Waiting for YouTube to begin. And then we will get started. I can't believe it's almost 1 p.m. Central Time. I'm off to a late start. There we go. Here goes notification. I'm going to go to YouTube. All right. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to Theology Central. I'm going to find our channel here on YouTube. Here we are. We have 512 subscribers on YouTube. Wow. That's pretty good. I mean, I know it's not like on one hand, I've got 512 subscribers on YouTube. Whoa, look at me. On the other hand, I think that's a pretty good. If you can get just think about it from a logical perspective. If you can get 500 people to subscribe to your YouTube channel, I mean, if only 100 of them would support you even at $1 a month, I mean, that would be $100 a month. I mean, you would be set. But, yeah, but even if you have 100 of those 500 who listen to everything you do, that's pretty good. So there's a lot of that 500. I don't even focus on the 500. If I can just get 100 of them listening, engaging, supporting, I mean, that's a pretty good thing. But yeah, you would be. So, all right, I'm going to go here. All right. All right, we say the map is weird. All right, the map. Okay, there we go. All right. If I can get, I need to check. Oh, what am I doing? I don't even know what I'm doing. Yeah, I probably should not be doing a live broadcast today, but okay. Here we go. If I can get this to work. All right. All right, I hope we're good to go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are in for one of those special treats. This is one of those episodes that happens after I have a seizure. This is one of those post-seizure episodes, so you never know what's going to occur, ever. So, but no, hopefully it'll go well. Hey, someone from Canada is tuning in, Ontario. I'm telling you, the Canadians only usually listen to me after midnight, so whenever I have Canadians listening to me before midnight, I get very nervous, like I don't know what's going on. All right, so, but thank you so very much. And I think we're good to go. I'm going to put this iPad down. All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I do hope this goes well. I really, really do. I really, really do. All right, here we go. Without any further delay. All right. Stretch a little bit. All right. Crack my neck. All right, here we go. We're going to go in. This is going to be some work. All right. What I do is after I have a seizure, I always choose something that requires a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of detail. And I'm going to try to force myself to get it all right. And then if it goes all wrong, then I'll get really upset with myself and so I do everything the exact way you're supposed to handle. Yeah. But you know what? It's not my fault, right? I mean, what happened to me in the military that almost killed me, I didn't do it to myself. It's what I have to live with. But hey, that's what happens. So you can either allow it to control you, or you can look at what happened to you and say, no, that's not going to stop me from doing what I want to do and need to do. So I want to get this episode done, and I feel like I need to get this episode done. So I'm going to do it irregardless of what happens. So that's probably not the smartest thing to do. The smart thing to do would probably be lay down and rest. But no, not going to happen. All right? So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Without any further delay, we go live. In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday, January the 15th, 2026. It is currently 12:51 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the Theology Central studio located right here in Abilene, Texas. Now, I'm very aware that my personality, the way I deliver my episodes, you may say that I'm too overly dramatic. You may say I'm too loud. You may say I'm too repetitive. You may not like my humor. You may say that I'm too cynical. I'm too critical of things within Christianity. Some may even accuse me of hating the church. There are a lot of things I understand why people don't like me, would not listen to me, would not support me. I very much understand that. I have a tendency of making the majority of people not like me. Sometimes I hate myself for finding myself in that kind of a situation, right? Sometimes like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you just go along to get along? Why don't you just do that, right? You don't always have to be taking the adversarial position. You don't always have to be, going against everyone. Sometimes just be quiet and just go along with everyone, and it would make your life a lot easier. And look, in many cases, there's no question about it. I mean, when I was about to be, I was going to get out of the military and I was going to be brought on as the assistant pastor at a church right there in Bellevue, Nebraska, a relatively large church, especially from where I ended up. But guess what? All I needed to do was preach a little 15-minute pastor appreciation message. It was Pastor Appreciation Sunday. I was given the task of doing a little 15-minute message. And what did I do? Oh, no. I walked to the pulpit and I just put everyone on full blast. Look, if you really want to appreciate the pastor, then let's not worry about the stupid cake that's downstairs. How about you people actually show up to church? How about you show up with an open Bible? How about you show up with a notebook? And I just go, boom. I said, I detonate a bomb. And guess what happened? Well, that was the end, because I ticked off so many people that if I was going to be brought on as the associated pastor, I probably would have been detrimental to that church. So I could not get out of the military, and my goal to get into ministry came to an abrupt end. In fact, nothing else happened for over 10 years. Over 10 years. And then when I become a pastor, what do I ultimately do? I mean, I remained one for over 20 years, almost 25 years, but ultimately I ran everyone off there because of my approach to doing things. So I know there is a lot that people may not like about me. I'm very much admitting that, and I'm admitting it sometimes it's my own fault. I mean, I got kicked off Christian radio, for crying out loud. So I know that. But I will say this. I believe that whenever I turn on this microphone, or even when I stood in the pulpit, whatever subject I was going to cover, whatever book I was going to study, that I went more in depth than almost anyone ever has or ever will. And I will say that, and I don't think that's being arrogant. I think I can demonstrate that, right? When other people cover a subject, they may do it in 2 or 3 Sundays. I may go a year. On this podcast, so many times, I will go, it will turn into something much larger and longer than maybe even necessary. But I always want to cross every T, dot every I, leave no stone unturned. I want to dig in. So when I found myself watching a podcast episode by Kirk Cameron on the subject of annihilationism, I knew inevitably, oh boy, we're going in, and who knows how long this is going to take. And here we are, January the 15th, 2026, and we're still talking about this. And we're going to be talking about it for I don't know how long, but I can guarantee you this. I am trying to be fair. I'm trying to be accurate. And I'm trying to go as in-depth as I feel like I need to go. In fact, I may even go beyond that. And this episode is going to demonstrate that, because I think what we're going to be talking about, sorry, I had to cough there. What we're going to be talking about I think is something that most people would probably ignore. And maybe many Christians sitting in the pulpit have never even discussed or even heard talked about from behind the pulpit. So we are going to go in, and I hope it proves to be beneficial. So let me set everything up. We reviewed every single word Kirk Cameron had to say, and clearly he promoted annihilationism, and we offered our critique, we offered our analysis. Kirk Cameron came back, offered kind of his, hey guys, everyone's upset with me, everyone's attacking me, let me explain what I did. We reviewed every word of that. He's going to be at some point doing a round table where he's going to bring in people who hold to annihilationism, and he's going to bring in people who hold to eternal conscious torment. And they're going to discuss it. And when he does, we will review every word of that. So that's what we've done. We've tried to be very fair. We've also reviewed another sermon that was against annihilationism. We reviewed that and we tried to be very fair. So we've done all of that, but then I told you we were going to start working through the text, and we're going to be very careful. So one of the things we did, due to listener input, we started talking about those things that are extremely clear, especially that we see in the book of Revelation about Satan, fallen angels, the beast, and the false prophet. I thought we built a very good case of what is just absolutely clear in the text. But I said, hey, what we need to do is just walk through all the texts that talk about judgment after death. So where did we end up? Well, we ended up in Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, where we read these words. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. All right, very important words. Now, why are these words important? Because they kind of serve as the first and last real words about judgment after death. So we looked at Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, and today we were going to move on to the next verse that really talks about judgment after death, and that would bring us into the New Testament. But before we can move on to the next verse, before we can move on to the next verse in the Bible that I think clearly talks about judgment after death, I think we have to stop. And I think we have to deal with something that I think should at least bother us to some level. And if it doesn't bother us, I think it should. Because there is something about Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 that should make you go, wait a minute here. I've got a lot of questions. I want you to think about this. I want you to wrap your mind around this. The first clear verse in the Bible about resurrection and final judgment is Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. That means the very first verse that really is clear about judgment after death appears very, very late in the Old Testament. And not only is it the first verse that does, it's also the last. Really, in many ways, Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 is the only words in the Old Testament about judgment after death. Now, if you're an annihilationist and you don't believe in eternal conscious torment, you think that they would start with this fact. You think this would be, I'm going to try to help them out. But typically they start with some emotional argument, and typically their exegetical arguments are horrible, okay? But this is just a fact. Wait a minute. You're talking Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. You're going through the entire Old Testament, and you basically have nothing that talks about judgment after death, and it doesn't show up until Daniel? I mean, come on, that should make everyone go, what is going on? So if you think about it, this ultimately means that the Old Testament goes its entire long story from Genesis through Moses, through the monarchy, through the prophets, through the exile, and only at the very end does it finally say in anything that could even be defined as plain, hey, some will be raised to everlasting life and some to everlasting contempt. I mean, come on. Isn't that crazy to you? I know if you go to church, you're like, yeah, who cares? I don't know. That's a long history where nobody's really being warned, hey, you could possibly die and suffer for all eternity. Like it seems from a theological perspective, it is very difficult for me to wrap my mind around that. And so before we can move on, and if you don't know, the next verse is John chapter 5. And I think before we can even hope to even look at John chapter 5, we got to deal more with Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. We can't just move on because in some ways, John chapter 5 is absolutely dependent on Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. You can argue that the entire New Testament's teaching on judgment after death is dependent on Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. All right? And I just think I don't know. I don't know how else to express it, all right? So I think we have to ask some questions. Why does Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 finally show up so late? Why does the subject matter that it covers show up so late? And what does this maybe tell us ultimately about how the Bible works and what the Old Testament was trying to do? There's a lot of questions that should come to our mind. All right? So let's jump in. I'm going to go as in depth as I can. I'm going to try to, and I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to help you understand why there was such a debate in the New Testament. And you may be very familiar with the debate that was occurring during the New Testament, or maybe you have forgotten it. But that debate that appears in the New Testament, the reason that debate occurs, I think is because of Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. If Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 is there, I don't know if you have the debate that appears in the New Testament. So to understand the New Testament, we really have to try to go back and do more work on Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 than we've already done. So let's first reestablish the fact, because I want to make sure we get this down. Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 is the first. I know I'm going to be repetitive, but that's okay. I already said I can do that sometimes. It is the first. Everyone say it with me. It is the first clear statement of resurrection of individuals to two different destinies with lasting consequences. And it is also the last clear statement in the Old Testament. Everything before, it may hint at it. It may express some hope for it. It may describe it or kind of talk about this concept in some poetic way. It may do so in a metaphorical way. It may do so in capturing the longing of someone suffering. But nothing else states it plainly. So the doctrine of resurrection and judgment after death is not woven evenly through the Old Testament. It is not introduced until really as you get close to the end of the Old Testament. And that's pretty staggering. I mean, just wrap your mind around that. Just try to wrap your mind around that. Just forget theology, forget church. Just think about it from a practical level. Here's all these people who lived for a very long time, and there's almost no information given to them. And it seems in any clear way, or not clearly articulated in the text, about what happens after death. And then Daniel 12 comes along, and whoa, it seems to be very clear. All right? Now, how late does Daniel appear? Right? So I'm just going to reestablish those facts clearly, but now let's move on to how late does Daniel actually show up? Daniel is one of the latest books in the Old Testament in terms of historical setting and composition. Most scholars, including I think most conservative ones, place Daniel in the 6th century BC exile period. with the final form of the book reaching its climax in the Persian early Hellenistic period, roughly 500 to 300 BC. So Daniel 12 appears nearly at the very end of the Old Testament history. Definitely after the law, definitely after the monarchy, definitely, I think before the book is completely finished, after the exile, and then at least in the exile, and then the return from the exile. You could say it is very much in the late Second Temple period worldview. All right? We have to get that. So by the time you get to Daniel, Israel has been destroyed, the temple has fallen, the monarchy is gone, the nation in many cases has died in history to some level. And then does Scripture say, hey, death itself is not the end. And I don't think that's an accident. I think that's a good time to remind everyone of that. Now, for most of the Old Testament, I think this is accurate to say, it focused on land. I know many in the Reformed world, especially the amillennialists, would just, that land becomes, symbolic of, spiritual influence and power and somehow relates to the church. But in the Old Testament, you can't get around it. They over and over focused on land, promises of land. And ladies and gentlemen, that was literal physical land. If you go and make that land not literal physical land, then I'm sorry, we can't get anywhere in the Bible. Clearly, the Old Testament focused on nations. It clearly focused on covenants, plural. Obedience is obviously greatly stressed. Blessing and curse depended upon that obedience. No way to get around that. And for them, reward and punishment within that framework wasn't about eternal life or eternal contempt or eternal conscious torment or annihilationism. No, it was about crops. It was about enemies. It was about exile. It was about restoration. It was about, are we going to get the land? The Old Testament is not obsessed with the afterlife in any way, shape, or form. There's no way to get, if you think the Old Testament is obsessed with the afterlife, I'm sorry, you're reading something that's not there. If you want to describe theologically, the Old Testament is obsessed with God's purpose in history, not God's purpose in everlasting life or everlasting punishment. It's about God's purpose in history. And if you think about it, that can tell you something. Sometimes the way Christians read the scriptures, we have a tendency of reading the scriptures based on our thinking, not on the thinking of the people at the time, not even based on the text at the time, because we read the text in our own mind and our own framework, which is, once you do that, it's the death of biblical hermeneutics. So then that raises the question, if that's the focus, crops and land and covenants and obedience is that type of thing, and all of those, and punishment and reward is those types of things. When you take all of that into consideration, then why does the resurrection show up at the end? And why does it become necessary at the end? Because I think if you look at the Old Testament, resurrection becomes very, very necessary. Let me just ask you, as a good Bible student, why, when you get to Daniel, why do you think the subject of resurrection becomes so important? Life after death and reward and punishment. Why do you think it becomes so important in Daniel chapter 12? Why? Just think about it practically, logically, and theologically. The first person who gets this right wins $1 million. All right. Actually, you don't, because I don't have $1 million to give you. If I did, I would give you $1 million, but I don't. All right. So if we can raise $2 million, I'll give away $1 million, because I'm going to keep $1 million for myself. Right. Okay. I'm just joking. All right. But no, seriously, why? Well, I think you can see why. by the time you get to Daniel, can we just say things aren't looking so good? All those promises about the land flowing with milk and honey, and it's going to be perfect, and you're going to dwell there forever, and everything's going to be wonderful, and everything's going to be great. Come on, I'm going to be very blunt. That's looking like that was a fairy tale. It looks like God just forgot about all of that. It looks like it's never going to happen. Think about this, all right? The northern kingdom, Israel is gone by the time you get here, right? The northern kingdom, Israel, was destroyed by Assyria in 722 BC. Its capital, Samaria, fell. The population was killed, deported, scattered, and it never returns as a political national entity. It's gone. All right. That's already bad. That's already bad. That's really bad. You have the divided kingdom. The entire northern part of the kingdom is gone. Okay, well, wait a minute. What's about the land and the promises and the covenants? That's not looking good. People are dead. How do you process that theologically, practically, if you were a Jew? So by the time Daniel shows up, Israel as a united nation is no longer exists. It doesn't even look like it could ever exist. Only Judah remains. And depending on how we work out the time frame, it's either about to fall or it's already fallen. And so then what happens? Well, we know Judah becomes conquered by Babylon.